everyone, welcome to today's lecture. So today we'll be looking at card sorting, thematic analysis and conceptual models in a bit of detail today. So we have discussed card sorting earlier, so I will go through some of it quickly and we'll discuss some of the aspects that we have not discussed earlier. Now, card sorting, as we know, is a research tool and where the study participants place individually labeled cards into groups according to criteria that make the most sense to them. So, this is a very important way in which we can understand how the architecture of our, for example, app should be. So, it becomes a very important to involve the stakeholders because, for example, the users, the application that we're designing is for them, and if they're not able to find the different headings or their way around the application, then the whole exercise becomes futile. So here the participants will be categorizing the different topics under certain themes, and that helps us know that how do they see this information clustered together. So the process is the preparation where we have the cards. On each card we have a certain attribute that is mentioned, so one attribute per card, and then the participants are asked to group these cards in a way where it makes a lot of sense so that they are similar in terms of the theme or broadly the heading. And then we can see that the participants label these cards. Now again, it depends on whether we are going for the open or the closed method of card sorting. We'll see that also quickly. And then finally, we'll analyze the data that we have collected. So we can see that how it is that the participants are viewing these cards under certain themes or certain headings. So now the closed card sorting. So this is where the users sort cards into the predefined categories. So we give them, so here in this example, we can see that they have been given 3 different headings already, and now all the cards that they have been provided with, each of them having a different attribute or a different keyword. So they have to now sort all of these cards under these 3 different headings. So that will tell us that which of these cards have a relationship together, which have a similar relationship which goes with that particular heading that we have at the top. And now in this particular method, the respondents don't have to think about the category because the category is already given to them. So this is comparatively a simpler way of sorting the cards because the headings are already there and they have to arrange the cards or distribute the cards under those headings. So it is a little bit of an easy exercise comparatively. So when do we use this particular method of card sorting? So this is when we want to find out if the users sort cards at the same categories as we would. So now as a design team member, when we are having this exercise, so will we also go about the same way when we're distributing the cards as the participants are? So it will tell us that where the thinking aligns or it does not align, and whether we need to change our thinking and realign the cards. So that will give us some food for thought. Also, need to know whether the users understand our labels or find them confusing. So this also tells us whether these headings that we have provided, are the participants able to understand what does it stand for, and then are they able to sort the different cards accordingly, or is there something misleading about these headings which is leading to some kind of confusion amongst the participants. So that also tells us insights about the heading itself. And also it is used when we have several category label options and we need to decide which one works best. So here we have 3, but we may have say 7 for example, and we may not be sure that which headings we should keep out of these 7 and which we should discard. So when the participants are organizing these cards under those 7 headings, then we may find that they have left out some of the headings altogether. So it will tell us that which of these headings are the ones which are making a lot more sense to the participants. So it also helps us discard the headings that may not be as useful or as appropriate as the ones that they have finally selected. The open card sorting, on the other hand, is where they have to create the headings by themselves also. So this is a little bit more challenging and complex, because in order to sort the cards under different headings, so they have to create those headings. So they have to first see the themes that the cards are creating, and then accordingly give a heading, and then vice versa, back and forth. They may want to then change the heading also, depending on how they are now interpreting the cards. So this is quite interesting, because we also get to see that how the participants are viewing all these cards together and what kind of headings are they coming up with. So now this is a very interesting method, especially when we're looking at finding some of the fresh ways at approaching this problem, because we may have, say, a block, we are not able to break out of that box kind of a thinking. So here the participants' fresh approach may lead us into a direction that we had not fathomed earlier. So that is another advantage of this particular process. And it also, there may be an instance when we are not sure at all that how we should name the categories, so we may be totally blank, and that also will help us come up with these headings. And also when we are coming up with, say, as an example, we are designing a new website, so there we want a new approach, but which again the participants or the users will be able to understand. It should not be something so out of character that they are not able to find their way in the website. So here also, as a new approach, as a approach wherein the participants can, keeping the wayfinding in place, they can come up with those interesting and creative ways with which we can come up with those headings for our cards or our items. So the open card sorting is more appropriate when we don't know how to group and label our content and we want a different approach, and also when we want to find out how users perceive the information on our website, because there is one way in which the team is perceiving the information, but how do the users perceive it? So it helps us connect with the users directly and see their way of thinking. So it tells us how they are operating, how their mind is operating, and also to find out if there are groups in our audience that perceive the content differently, and therefore whether they are grouping the cards in a different manner than what we expected. So all these insights, if one requires, then this method of card sorting is more appropriate. Now there's a third way of approaching this card sorting method, which is the hybrid method. So hybrid meaning that we will use a little bit both of the open and closed card sorting methods. So here we will provide our participants with predefined categories, which is similar to the closed card sorting, but we also allow them to create their own categories. So we may provide them with 3 categories, and then we can say that you may create more categories if required. So when should we conduct the hybrid card sorting? So this is more appropriate to use when the researchers already have some established categories, but they would also like to see the target group's thought process, that what kind of categories would they come up with. So this is more appropriate in those situations. Now card sorting can be conducted in 2 ways: qualitative card sorting and quantitative card sorting. So the number of participants we recruit will vary whether we are conducting qualitative card sorting or quantitative card sorting. So the qualitative card sorting is why the users are placing the cards under certain categories. So there we want to understand the why and why they are grouping it. So they may have an explanation, they may have a thought process that why they're doing it. So this is an important information for the design team, which helps us get into the head of the user and also sort of predict or understand that what makes the user make certain decisions. So in this process, the researcher may also ask the participants to think out loud when they are grouping the cards. So thinking out loud and speaking out why they feel that these 5 cards will be grouped together, what are those reasons because of which they will be together or they should be placed together. So this helps the research team understand the thinking behind the actions of the users. And for this particular method, the qualitative one, at least 15 participants should be there who are whose results then will help us see a pattern, establish way in which the user is approaching this. Then the quantitative card sorting method, it helps researcher understand the statistical validity of common groupings. So we know that quantitative deals with numbers. So here, rather than why, what will be more important is that how many times people group the same kinds of cards together. So here we are looking at the repetitive number in which these cards have been grouped together. So it is also an important insight that we are getting. Only thing is we are just looking at how many rather than why. So both insights are important. Again, it depends on the research team's thinking that what is it that they're looking for. So if they are looking at validating their groupings that they have done, for example, and they want to see that how many participants would also group them in a similar manner, then in that case the quantitative is a better approach. And if they want to understand that why the user is doing something that they are doing, for that the qualitative is a better approach. And for quantitative, because again it is numbers and we are going to generalize this, so for this kind of method 30 to 50 participants is a good number to begin with. So it will give us some trends, it will help us see some patterns, and it will help us make a decision or come up with a final answer that which of the, how many participants went with a certain style of or certain way of grouping. So that will give us an important information. So it will tell us that out of 50, say 42 did it in a specific way. So that shows that 42 of those participants understand that this is how they should be grouped. And similarly, the research team can come up with their own insights from the actions of these participants. So now we are going to be analyzing all of these data. So now here what is required is to compile the data. We can see here in some examples that how this data is telling that lemon is citrus, orange is citrus, but melon is not. So we can see that how the different type of sorting has been done here. So the compiling the data is important because it puts it in a format which makes it easy for analysis. And secondly, when we organize them, so they help us identify the patterns and common groupings. So category names, themes can be sometimes challenging due to the varying placements of cards by participants. So there are several tools that are available which help, diverse visualizations for the in-depth analysis of placements. So those can be utilized as well to understand depending on how large the data is that we have collected. So we can see the advantages of card sorting are that it is a quick and easy process to implement, and it provides insights into how individual categorize information, and also it helps expose inherent structures within the information. But on the other hand, some disadvantages are that it is confined to only the elements that are represented on the cards. So we are not adding any more cards here, we are just utilizing the cards that are given to the participants. Of course, depending on the method, open, close, hybrid, the headings may be added or changed. And then another disadvantage is that it suggests solutions that already assume certain structures, and as the number of categories increases, managing card sorting becomes more complex because the larger number of cards may lead to some errors, some human errors also maybe, because handling a large number of cards can be difficult, or the users may find some overlaps between some of the cards, so that can also be a little bit complex there. Also, as the number of categories increases, so managing card sorting becomes more complex, because now there are more number of headings, more categories, more number of cards, and then it can get a little messy, can get a little confusing, because some cards the user may find that they are overlapping with the other categories. So where do they belong best? So those decision making will also be required to make. So it gets a little bit more complex when we have a large number of headings. So how do we also simplify it? So that is another advantage of card sorting, that how can we, if we are getting too many of these headings, how can we sort of compress them, make minimum number of headings so that it is easy for the user. So these advantages, disadvantages also tell us that how can the final product be more user friendly and more effective for the user to operate. Now, thematic analysis is a research method, and it is used to identify and interpret patterns or themes in our data set, and by doing which often leads to new insights and understanding. So specifically in the qualitative data that we collect, so which is more of the conversation kind, wherein we are having these insights of the user in terms of maybe a recorded conversation that we have had. So thematic analysis is where we are finding some patterns and themes from the data that we have collected. And now thematic analysis after card sorting is when we have scrutinized the outcome of the card sorting, and the objective here is to spot trends or themes in the way that the participants have classified the cards, and these themes can offer insights into users' cognitive structures and their understanding and categorization of the information, that how do they look at these cards, how do they interpret this information, and how are they categorizing them. So that gives us important information. So some of the steps in thematic analysis are transcript creation, data familiarization, selection of quotation. So we saw that from card sorting how we derive those themes, but thematic analysis is also applied in the qualitative data analysis. So we have seen that the different ways in which we collect data, qualitative data, which is interviews, focus groups, and other methods. So here we are having more like a conversation or discussion with the users. So now this data that we are collecting, we may collect by noting down what the participant is saying, or we may also record this conversation. So the first step here is the transcript creation. So now if the participant is conversing with me, for example, in Hindi, and now I have to transcribe this data, so I want to now see it written, because hearing this conversation again and again may be a little bit more tedious. So I will have to now type down the conversation, and then depending on how I, as a team member of the design team, would progress with this information, I may want to translate this into English as well, right? Now, we can take an example of a more difficult group, a more tedious language. So, for example, I have to interview people with hearing inability. So, in that case, how will I go about it? Will be a little bit more different than I would with people who are conversing in a language that I understand, or maybe people who do not speak in the same language as I do. Now, in that case, what I will have to do is I will need a translator. In case of people with hearing disability, I will need somebody who is a sign language expert, and this sign language expert will listen to my question and with gestures make the hearing impaired person understand. Then he will or she will inform me the answer verbally, which I will record, for example. And now this recorded conversation that I have, I will transcribe it, I will type it out, and then as another step, because there may be some gap between the translation from the translator or the sign language expert to me. So I may have to, as step, show the video of the recording wherein the interpreter is interpreting what the subject is conveying to them, and they may have to check it with the transcribed data and validate that yes, the translation is correct. So there are several steps depending on the group that we are talking with. If I'm talking with somebody who belongs to, say, Germany, I want to understand the experiences of German people when they visit India. I don't understand the language, so I may have to take somebody who understands the language. They will translate it to them in English if the German counterpart also doesn't understand English, and then they will translate it to me in English, but I may want to get it confirmed by another translator as well, just to make sure that there is no human error involved, because the dialects may be different, the accent may confuse the translator, there may be various ways. So after this transcription is created, once I have the correct data with me, now I will familiarize myself with this data, because I have to be able to understand this data that I've collected. So I will have to read and reread it and get familiar with this. Now next step will be that from this data I will derive some keywords. So because I am familiar with this data now, so now I will be looking at what are the keywords that are coming out of this whole data that I have. So they may be, for example, with the German tourist, some keywords may be drinking water or safety or basic amenities, travel. So these are some of the keywords that are, you know, are more present in most of the conversation that I am having with my subject here. So now once I have these keywords and this data I have in front of me, I will now derive some codes out of it. So these coding is short phrases or words, these are called codes, and these are assigned to segments of data that capture the core message, significance or theme. So now lack of basic amenities, for example, so that can be a theme that the German counterpart is facing. So we may find out later on that the amenities are present, but maybe the signages are not available, or they are not in plenty, or they are not universal. So the German tourist is unable to understand the visual language of the signages, because it is written, for example, in Hindi or written in English, and which the German reading person is not able to read. So that is the gap that we will eventually identify, that it is not that the amenities are missing, but the visual universal communication is missing. That may be a finding which we may come up at the end of it. I'm just providing it as an example that how do we come up with these codes. Now from these codes that we have derived, so we will now be coming up with theme development. So this theme development is organizing the codes to a meaningful group to identify patterns and relationship, and offering insights into research questions. So we did start with certain research questions to begin with and some gaps that we were looking at. So now we will be categorizing or organizing these codes into groups, and we will see that what kind of patterns are arising out of this, what kind of relationships are occurring. So that will help us see this data in terms of these relationships and patterns. So this helps to answer the research questions and underscore the study's contribution to the knowledge. And also the detailed analysis of codes are categorized into abstract interpretations. So then how do we also interpret it? So that is also done by categorizing these codes. So when we review these themes, so here we reiterate the data, and theme development is also done at this stage. So here we review it, we split We may combine, discard, or even create the theme depending on how accurate or not we find it for our purpose. So, coming to conceptual models, the development of conceptual models. So, they are used in human computer interaction as a way for designers to communicate how they interpret the user's mental models. So, this they are communicating to the stakeholders or the team of the designers or developers, and they help ensure that everyone involved in the design process understands how the users interact with the product or the service. So, the conceptual model visually represents how a designer understands the user's mental models, and it is helpful to create a conceptual model because the designers use information from the user research that we have conducted, like interviews or surveys or observations. So, that information is utilized here, and they use this information to develop the visual representation of how users perceive and interact with the system or the product. So, when it comes to development of conceptual models, so this is the final step which involves creating a unique representation of the data which is guided by existing theories, and we can see here that these representations can take many different forms, so including flowcharts, diagrams, wireframes, or prototypes. And we can see here that how these concepts, we can see here how this whole graph has been prepared. It's an example, and you can check the link at the bottom for more information. So, the ability to quickly and easily sketch conceptual models can save a lot of time in the user interaction design process and help create more intuitive applications. So, how do we create an effective conceptual model? So, here we can do this by taking few steps like simplifying the user interface. So, the conceptual model make it easier for users to navigate and understand the interface by providing a clear and concise representation how the application works. So, if it is very cluttered, very confusing, and the wayfinding is difficult, so of course it will lead to confusion and finally getting frustrated. But a simplistic model helps the user navigate more easily. Then also the consistent use of terminology. So, ensuring that the terminologies that we are using are consistent throughout the pages. So, if we are saying cancel somewhere, then we should not say stop or some other synonym for cancel. So, if we are using cancel in one place, then in each page wherever something needs to be cancelled, the term cancel should continue to be used. So, this helps the cognitive process of the user because now it is not overloaded because they are familiar with this term cancel. So, whenever they see cancel, they will understand what it stands for. If we use stop on the other page, then they will take a moment and they will have to review what they should do next, how should they proceed. But if the same term is used, then it will be more faster processing from their end, cognitive, and then of course leading to the physical action that they take. So, the next is the describe task and goals. So, the conceptual model should describe task and goal without revealing the specific user interactions required to achieve them. So, if the user says compose an email, so they may have a certain way in which they are visualizing composing of this email. So, the whole model will change the steps, some of them may be minimized for example. Then also support development processes. So, conceptual models can be an important tool for developers and users. So, by providing a clear understanding of how an application is intended to work, the conceptual model can help developers identify potential problems or inconsistencies that may be there, so that this final product that they are coming up with will be more seamless in design and reduce rework and developmental resources. So, if the conceptual model is well designed, so it ensures that there is no room or little room for reworking. So, reworking of course requires time, resources. So, if the rework is not required, so that means that the company or the team conserves their resources. So, a good conceptual model is really important for that aspect also. Although in design process we have discussed that how we will be looking at the user feedback and integrating it and improving the system, but if the conceptual model is strong from the beginning, then it leaves less room for this improvement. Small improvements that are required over time, of course they will be integrated, but a major overhaul may not be required if we are starting strong with a good and solid and robust conceptual framework. Now, an important thing to note here is that the conceptual model is a representation of the entities, relationships, and principles that govern a system or domain, and it is different from a conceptual design. So, a conceptual model is different because the conceptual design involves a process of defining the architecture, structure, and functionality of a system in an abstract way. So, both of these terminologies, although may have quite a similar ring, but they both stand for, so they should not be confused with one another. Now, the purpose of conceptual model is to clarify ideas and create a shared understanding amongst the stakeholders. It abstracts the complexity of a system into more manageable components, and on the other hand, the purpose of the conceptual design is used to plan the architecture or blueprint for a system, ensuring that it will meet the necessary requirements and work as expected. So, both of these terms, although similar sounding, but they are quite different. Now, information architecture is a process of organizing components into a comprehensible whole. So, how in a building, if we see the architecture, when we enter a building, right, and there is a certain layout is there, because we will see that in an Indian home, the toilet and the kitchen will not be next to each other. So, there is a certain pattern that we have when it comes to organizing our spaces. Or for example, the kitchen will be closer to the dining area for the ease of movement, to bring out the food late on the table for people to eat it and then take the dishes back. So, we see that there is a lot of sense when it comes to the layout of the house. So, similarly, there has to be the same kind of sense when it comes to the layout of our application, website or application that we're coming up with. So, information architecture becomes very important here, that how are we laying out our information. So, this is, we can see by Jared Spool, is the saying that good design when it's done well becomes invisible. Only when it's done poorly that we notice it. So, this is a very significant statement, because why it becomes invisible is because it is gelling so well with what we are doing. It is helping us so much in the process that the tool or the furniture or the equipment or the website application, we do not even notice it, because it is making our work that we set out to achieve, it is making it so easy for us. Only when there is some sort of a hurdle, there is some frustration, there is some issue with it, something is not easy to find, for example, support is not able to find, or we cannot make a call to the support group, or there's some question that we want to ask which is left unanswered, or there is some error but we don't know why this error is coming. The application is just not letting us proceed, but not telling us also why we're not proceeding further. So, we have to like spend 10 minutes figuring out that after we put in the email, there was a space, and for that reason it is saying that the email is not valid. So, only when we press backspace and that space is gone, now it is accepting it. So, things like that which may not be very easy to notice by the user, but may cause a lot of frustration. So, the whole system design, the whole design should be in a manner which is so intuitive, which understands that why the user is facing this frustration. So, whenever there is a small frustration or a small setback or something which speeds down the user, so that becomes very apparent, that becomes very like a sore thumb, and of course, that means that there is still some room for improvement. So, we will end today's lecture here, and I will see you all in the next class. Thank you.